Good evening, everybody. Welcome. I see some friendly and familiar faces, so thank you for coming and welcome to people who are coming for the first time. I'll be chairing this session on the use of these tools and how it has worked for migrant workers. And we will. I will do it in a very rapid fire way because we don't want a very deep panel here. We want to hear quickly, not quite Karan Johar's rapid fire, but something like it. And then we want to hear from you also. I'm sure you will have questions. Just to start the panel off and this event off, the reason that SLD and HELM Studio decided to work together was because, in a very funny way, migrant workers who are some of the poorest workers in the country and also with probably the least access to the rights and entitlements like education and so on, so typically low literacy. How is it that we have a technology partner which is about computers and tablets and all that? How is this partnership an important one? How is poverty and technology working together? Because we think of technology as something that only the very literate can access and find useful. So that's, so this is a way to say that really technology that is most appropriate for the poorest of the poor is the kind of technology that we want to see in usage. We want to develop more of a creative space for that. And RLS has been a vision partner in this. So although Rajiv and Stefan have been very modest, I do want to thank them for their vision in working with SLD on this. So to start off, I want to ask you, Kusnoda, who is the program director of the migration work in SLD, is what is the situation of migrant workers that you have found in the work that you are doing across 4 or 5 states, and what makes technology an important partner for this work?
बेसिकली मैं माइग्रेंट्स के साथ काम कर रही हूँ, तो मेरा जो अभी तक एक्सपीरियंस रहा, जिस तरीके से मैं ग्राउंड पे गई और मैंने लोगों से इंटरैक्ट किया, मुझे कई तरीके की इश्यूज जो कि उनके वल्नरेबिलिटी को बहुत इंक्रीज करता है, वो मुझे देखने को मिले। जैसे लोगों को उनके राइट्स के बारे में या इंटाइटलमेंट्स के बारे में बिल्कुल भी नॉलेज नहीं है। बिकॉज ऑफ दैट वो एक्सेस टू इंटाइटलमेंट्स जो है वो उनका बहुत ही मिनिमम है, लोग उस तक पहुँच ही नहीं पाते। दूसरी चीज़ मुझे ये देखने को मिली कि इशू ऑफ कॉन्ट्रैक्टर इन टर्म्स ऑफ माइग्रेशन इज़ वेरी हाई। उसमें देखने को ये मिला कि क्योंकि ये सिस्टम इतना कॉम्प्लेक्स है, उसकी वजह से क्या होता है कि एक वर्कर जो है उसको ये कभी पता ही नहीं चलता है कि वो कहाँ उसका एम्प्लॉयर कौन है। बिकॉज ये जो पूरा प्रोसेस है ये बहुत ही इनफॉर्मल है, तो जो आइडेंटिटी होती है एम्प्लॉयर की या कॉन्ट्रैक्टर की वो बहुत ही जिगजैग और बहुत हिडन प्लेटफॉर्म पे होती है। तीसरी चीज़ ये भी देखने को मिलती है कि लोग जो है बेसिकली ये जो ट्रांजिशन होता है, जब एक माइग्रेंट वर्कर एक सोर्स से डेस्टिनेशन की टुवर्ड्स माइग्रेट करता है, तो उसे बहुत सारी चीज़ों के बारे में पता नहीं होता है कि व्हाट आर द थिंग्स जिनको वो कैरी कर सकते हैं, जिसकी वजह से उनका जो माइग्रेशन हो रहा है वो सेफ हो और राइट। तो इस चीज़ की जानकारी नहीं होती, जिसकी वजह से मोस्ट ऑफ द जो इश्यूज रेज होता है वो related to all these things. दूसरी चीज़ है कि जब लोग माइग्रेट करके आते हैं, सोर्स से उठ के जब वो डेस्टिनेशन पे आते हैं, तो उनके पास कुछ आइडेंटिटी नहीं होती कि वो कहाँ से आए हैं, वो जहाँ पे रह रहे हैं वहाँ पर वो इंटाइटलमेंट्स को एक्सेस कर पाए, ये उनके पास मौका नहीं होता, क्योंकि उनके पास रेसिडेंस प्रूफ नहीं होता है, उनके पास वो जहाँ पे काम कर रहे होते हैं वहाँ का उनके पास कोई प्रूफ नहीं होता है, एम्प्लॉयर प्रूफ नहीं होता है। सो ये जो दिक्कतें हैं ये इनको फर्दर और वनरेबल पोजीशंस में धकेलता है। साथ ही साथ अगर वुमेन स्पेसिफिक बात करेंगे तो वुमेन की कंडीशन जो है वो बहुत ज़्यादा बुरी है, बिकॉज दे आर मोर प्रोन टू सेक्सुअल हरासमेंट। उनके साथ अलग अलग तरीके का अब्यूज़ होता है, उनके वर्क प्लेस पे, उनके रहने की जगह पे जो लिविंग कंडीशन है वो बहुत ज़्यादा हेल्दी नहीं होता है, जिसकी वजह से हेल्थ प्रॉब्लम जो है वो बहुत ज़्यादा उनको अफेक्ट करता है। तो these are some of the
Okay, so I will come back to you to ask about the technology part of the problem that you've used. So turning to Igor, Society for Labor and Development and ILO worked together on a huge 5-state research on recruitment and migration. And actually a couple of the researchers who worked on it are in the room with us here. And so can you share with us some of the findings that you got? This focused on garment workers and domestic workers. So very briefly, if you can share kind of the sense of the core parts of the problem that you discovered in your research.
अंग्रेजी में बोलूँगा, लेकिन अगर कोई सवाल है लेकिन हिंदी में बोलूँगा।
हिंदी
इतना अच्छा नहीं है। तो हमने रिसर्च की है SLD के साथ, और इसके अंदर में ऐसा हमें पता चला कि जो पहली जो सबसे अहम बात है कि ये जो कॉन्ट्रैक्टर्स होते हैं, ये जो मिडलमैन होते हैं, ठेकेदार इसको भी बोलते हैं, वो वो बुरे लोग तो नहीं हैं, ऐसे इनके साथ भी काम करना है। और किसी और लिहाज से ऐसे संगठन भी होते हैं जो ट्रैफिकिंग के लिहाज से उनको बुरे बोलते हैं, और इनके साथ इसके बाद काम करना बहुत मुश्किल हो जाता है। तो इनके साथ काम करने के लिए डायलॉग करना है, इनके साथ समझना है कि क्या क्या प्रॉब्लम होते हैं, किस लिए वो इस काम में शामिल होते हैं वगैरह। तो ये पहली बात है। दूसरी बात जो है कि जो गारमेंट वर्क होता है और जो डोमेस्टिक वर्क होता है बहुत अलग है। गारमेंट वर्क जो होता है यहाँ पे वो कॉन्ट्रैक्टर ठेकेदार के साथ होता है, और डोमेस्टिक वर्क जो होता है वो अलग अलग किस्म के डोमेस्टिक घरेलू कामगार होता है। ये जो लिविंग होता है, जो घर के अंदर में रहते हैं, और जो बाहर और जो बाहर कहीं शहर में रहते हैं, और इनकी स्थितियाँ बहुत अलग होते हैं, और इसकी ऑर्गेनाइजिंग का नतीजा भी अलग होना चाहिए। तो ये था, लेकिन हो सकता है बहस के अंदर में बाकी।
Your Hindi is superb. I didn't know you knew Hindi. Okay. Now Simran is from Nazdik, which works with tea garden workers in Assam and also Delhi slum workers, and is a legal empowerment organization. So let's begin to talk about the technology a bit. I think Nazdik has had some experience in the use of technology. So maybe you can share some ideas that you used.
English is okay?
Yeah.
So as mentioned, this is a legal empowerment organization. So we have been working with tea plantation workers in the Adivasi community in Assam and also low-income communities in Delhi. So a big part of our work is conducting trainings, basically rights-based trainings, so letting people know basically what their entitlements are from the government and then helping them access them. As mentioned earlier, one of the main issues that many low-income people actually don't even know what entitlements they're supposed to be receiving. So it's basically impossible for them to even demand their rights and make sure that they're getting what they're supposed to be. So, as I mentioned, part of our work has been conducting these trainings, and as we did these trainings, we realized that there's so many entitlements that aren't reaching people on the ground, and we knew of individual case studies and certain violations that were taking place, but we didn't have any comprehensive data to do any advocacy. So we might have a specific case about a tea plantation worker who went to the tea garden hospital and there was no doctor there, so she had to get referred to a hospital outside of the tea garden. In the process, she faced some health complications because of the delay and so on. So we knew this information, we knew it was happening, we knew some people in some cases, but again, it was hard to do broader advocacy with having like a one-off case here, one-off case there. So what we decided to do is use technology to help us gather this data. And we ran this project both in Assam and in Delhi during separate time periods, starting at separate time periods. And it's basically an SMS project where women in these communities were trained on first what their rights are, what their entitlements are, exactly like what the benefits are under each scheme that they're supposed to be getting, and then basically doing community monitoring of when people are not receiving these rights. And the way they would do this, first they would do the monitoring and just hear about cases that were happening and keep track of what's happening in the community, but then they would report the rights violations using an SMS platform. So just to get into a little bit of how the SMS platform works, is we worked with the community members that we trained to come up with a list of rights violations. For example, there was no doctor present at the hospital, or they didn't give somebody ration at the ration store this month. Or somebody went to the Anannya Center and wasn't given registered for her IGMSY benefit, or so on. So we came up with a list of violations that were relevant to the communities we worked in, and then a list of locations that these people went to get these services. And we coded each of these violations and locations with a number. So let's say, I'm just going to make up a number, Dagmar Medical College, the number might be 100. The violation might be no doctor is present. And the code for that might be 52. So what our community trained paralegals would do is when they hear of a case where a woman went to a hospital, there was no doctor there to treat her, they would send us an SMS with those two codes, the code of the hospital and the code of the violation. And what this did is multiple things. One, it helped make women leaders in their community. They were kind of this like a person that could house all these violations and collect information from the community members. Community members looked up to them, knew there was someone they could go to report violations. And then it was a way to collect all these violations in a systematic way. So we had this online platform, which is basically a website, where on the back end we would get all these violations, all these SMS text messages, where we would be collecting the data of the different violations happening over a period of time. And then on the front end of the website, there would be a map that would show all these different violations in the different locations that are happening. So we get an overview of which issues were taking place most often, where they were taking place, is there a specific hospital that is having more issues than others. And it was basically a way to collect all this information to figure out what the next steps were, like what is the advocacy that we want to do around this. So that's just an example of a tool we've used in both Assam and Delhi, and a technology that helped empower women in communities.
That sounds great. Thanks for the segue into technology. Ashim, I think you got a bit of a chance to play around with the technology. You came a little bit earlier. I saw you playing around with the tablets and the computer and looking up the things. And for those of you who have not seen this stuff, please come back tomorrow. It's still going on tomorrow? Yeah. To check out the technology. So maybe you are quite familiar with the migrant workers in the NCR area. So maybe you could tell the audience a bit about your take on the tools you have seen and knowing the workers. What do you think are the value of this?
Okay. One is that to me actually it's very exciting to be here. Partly, I come from a very old-fashioned trade union, so but not very sway about this thing. But I think what it makes me feel, I think this is happening a lot, and I think this is a good experimentation to begin with, because there are some complexities to the migration problem, which sometimes the normal old methods were not been able to deal with, because it is a question of connections. It is a question of really connecting, people from the originating place to the destination place. It's a question of the layers of contractors are opaque, so it becomes invisible in many ways. I think what excites me here is that it really opens up that space, and you're using technology to actually put that, which can really show the whole scenario and the whole process of our migration, and in a certain sense make it visible. I think it's I mean, this is an intuitive idea. This is something that I've been talking to many people, and I think I can see some of the elements here. Is that this is the beginning of a new idea of how you build a digital union, in a certain sense. Because in a certain sense, it's very important. I think we should get back to reconceptualizing some of this idea of how you really combine. I mean, I'm an organizer. I organize on the ground, but the reality is that every organizing is in some way building connections and building relationships. So if you have tools, then you can always build up framework of, which is what I would call digital unionism, where you build offline, inline processes, and I think I can see this happening. Now, conceptually, I understand a lot, but I think I'm totally illiterate as far as the technology is concerned. So I feel it very fascinating, and in fact, some of these processes could be very helpful in moving forward to a new kind of thinking and building a platform. I think that's very important. For migrant workers, someone who is actually absolutely in the shadow of even the normal labor movement, to bring them in the forefront through the digitalization and through this mechanism is a fantastic step forward, I think. And I think that's what I think excites me a lot. And I feel very good that I'm here and I'm with these young people who are doing this. And I feel more younger than I was when I came to the room, So that's great. I feel good about it.
Great, thanks. So one of the side effects of using these visuals and technology is also that we are able to scale up the work. Whereas doing the leafleting or doing training modules and all that, especially training modules, you do it in a room and then people go away. But if you have a tablet with visuals on it and things on it, then you can keep on having a cascading effect of training more people. Then they train others, they show it to others. So it's a way to scale up awareness raising and the knowledge that is needed to be out there. So now, having kind of covered a little bit about the problems and the importance of technology, we will move to some of the challenges and then we'll open up. So starting with Kusnoda, we should discuss maybe some of the good things that you have found in using these tools, because you've been basically experimenting with these tools for the last few months in the field, along with some of the coordinators, key coordinators who are out there. So these tools have been used out there. And of course it's a work in progress, but tell us about the good news and some of the bad news. Not the bad news, but the challenges.
बेसिकली फील्ड में जितना हम लोगों ने इसको टेस्ट करने का कोशिश नहीं किया एक्चुअली, तो कुछ अच्छी चीज़ें भी निकल करके आई और कुछ चैलेंजेस भी हम लोगों ने फेस किया. तो अच्छी चीज़ें ये थी कि जो लोग थे, स्पेशली जो इलिटरेट लोग हैं, वो इसको बहुत ज़्यादा अट्रैक्टिव फील कर रहे थे, क्योंकि इसमें जो आप लोगों ने देखा होगा, बेसिकली ये टूल्स जो है ये एनिमेशन के फॉर्म में है. आप पहले एनिमेशन देखते हैं, देन आप कुछ उससे रिलेटेड कुछ क्विज है जिसमें आप अपनी समझ को लेते हुए उसका रिस्पॉन्स देते हैं. देन फिर आपको कुछ रियल वीडियोस है जो कि मजदूरों की कहानियों से जुड़ा हुआ है, तो लोग फिर उससे रिलेट करते हैं। सो ये जो पूरा प्रोसेस है 3 चीज़ों को लेकर के, तो ये लोगों को काफ़ी अट्रैक्ट किया। लोग जो इसमें जिस तरीके से समझाने की कोशिश की गई है, वो तो हम लोगों ने कोशिश किया कि ये इजीएस्ट टर्म्स में हो तो लोग उसको समझ पाए। तो जो रिस्पॉन्स आ रहा था वो काफ़ी अच्छा था, लोग उसको समझ पा रहे थे, लोग कह पा रहे थे कि हमें और भी जानना है, हमें पीडीएस के बारे में भी जानना है, हमें नरेगा के बारे में भी जानना है। सो वी आर कलेक्टिंग देयर फीडबैक्स कि किस तरीके से फर्दर हम लोग और भी अगर टूल्स डेवलप करें तो उसको कैसे इनकॉर्पोरेट करें। चैलेंजेस अगर देखेंगे तो थोड़ा सा चैलेंजेस ये आ रहा है कि जो नंबर्स हैं वर्कर्स की वो बहुत ज़्यादा है। सो इन टर्म्स ऑफ कि हम एक टैबलेट लेकर के जा रहे हैं या 5 टैबलेट लेकर के जा रहे हैं एक गांव में, तो वो जो इफिशिएंसी हम अगर कहेंगे तो वो थोड़ा सा कम है। अगर हमारे पास ज़्यादा होता तो शायद हम ज़्यादा लोगों को कवर कर पाते और चीज़ों को ज़्यादा फास्टर पेस में मूव कर पाते। तो ये एक चैलेंज है।
Okay. Other than the tablets and the trainings, I also encourage people to look up the computers where lock stitch lives is portrayed. And the whole idea was this 360-degree tour that people could have of the destination from the source. So we can really tell people in Bihar, this is what Gurgaon looks like and this is where you are headed. Because that was a huge block we found, that people coming from source areas had no knowledge about where they were going to. And also people who were in destination were not really describing their experiences accurately to the source areas because they were ashamed to kind of say how horrible things are, because migration is supposed to be an upward mobility success story, which it often is not. So Igor, in the research, I'm sure, and from your own experience, you've found that migrant workers, there are a lot of gaps of knowledge and information. So what is your take on the use of this kind of technology for scaling up awareness raising?
मैं आशिफ जी के साथ बहुत सहमत हूँ कि टेक्नोलॉजी बहुत ज़रूरी है, और मेरे ख्याल ये जो आपने किया बहुत अच्छी बुनियाद है कि, लेकिन इसके अलावा काफ़ी और काम करना है। और सबसे महत्वपूर्ण बात यह है कि मजदूर और प्रवासी को जानकारी देने की बात ही नहीं, बल्कि देना और लेने की बात भी होता है, यानी कि समझाना भी करना है, समझाना भी है और समझना भी है। ये दो तरफ की बात होता है। और ये जो मॉडल्स होते हैं वो किसी तरीके से देने की बात होता है, लेकिन इनकी क्या तकाज़े होते हैं, इनकी क्या बात होते हैं, इसको भी समझना है। और इसीलिए समझना है कि हमें ये मालूम है कि जो मजदूरों हैं वो ज़्यादातर समय वो दलित होता है, मुसलमान होता है, या आदिवासी होता है, महिला होता है, और ज़िंदगी में हर एक सर्विस पाने के लिए कुछ न कुछ प्रॉब्लम होता है, और सिर्फ इसको समझना काफ़ी नहीं है। तो किस तरह से, किस ज़रिए से संगठन के सपोर्ट के साथ, समर्थन के साथ आप इसको सुधार सकते हैं, ये तो बहुत अहम बात। तो एक ही बहुत।
So I think that as a trade unionist, I can relate to that awareness raising is only the beginning, and that this has to turn into advocacy, organizing, building of power, and so on.
And maybe I can also add one other thing is that explaining the rights of people is one thing, but how to negotiate those rights is a completely different issue, and that negotiation process is extremely important. how is it, because in most of these situations of work, there's a situation of immiseration of disempowerment that happens. And so you have to be able to reverse that, you have to be able to bargain, and the right, just knowing the right can actually backfire, because if you don't know how to present it, how to use it in your advantage in the right moment at the right time, then of course it backfires. And that's something which, so the whole negotiation process is tailored to the local context, the working situation, the contract situation, whether it's a garment, whatever the work is really important.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think Simran will give us an example. I think you have tried using the information you're getting from your technology experiment and how to, and the challenges in using it for advocacy. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I can talk about advocacy and challenges. So yeah, I completely agree. I think just having information is not enough. The advocacy component is also very important. So with the SMS project that I talked about earlier, one was the goal of empowering women in their communities, but gathering data specifically for advocacy was another major goal of the project. So what we've done with some of the information we've gathered is each time we get an SMS, we do a verification of the rights violation that took place. That might include like a field visit or a phone call, and just gathering all the details of what the violation was. And then after we've gotten a certain amount of violations, what we do is we'll take some action on it. So for example, for some of the violations, in one resettlement colony in Delhi that we work in, we were getting a lot of SMS complaints about residents not getting tap water. So what we did is after we had a few complaints, we filed a bunch of administrative complaints with the government online, and within a few days, tap water was restored to these residents. We also did basically a trial period of 3 months with the project where we gathered over 200 violations over that period and did basically advocacy with 28 different government officials right after we had gathered the findings and analyzed the data. So I definitely think pairing the technology piece with advocacy is important, because it's great to have technology to gather all this information, but if you're not going to move that information forward, then it's just going to be abused, and it kind of loses the purpose after a point. And then I'll also just quickly touch on some of the challenges. So yeah, we've seen today, technology is definitely a great way to bring information to people. It's a great tool for empowerment for many people also. But I think it can be complicated on the ground at times. So I'd say two of the challenges we face in implementing this project was accessibility, and then also just tech literacy. So what I mean by accessibility is, cell phones are pretty common these days. Many, you may not have a smartphone, but you likely at least have a cell phone, so you're able to send a text message. But you might not have the type of phone plan where you can afford to send text messages all the time. So what we did to combat that is, since we are working in low-income communities, we would basically each month do a phone recharge for text messages for the paralegals we have trained in the community to make sure that they're not spending out of pocket to send us this information. We'll do the recharge for them. So that's just one example. And then in terms of tech literacy, I think that can really be an issue. A lot of the women we work with are older, they have cell phones, and they can answer the phone, but they don't necessarily know how to make a phone call or actually send a complicated text message, which I think are more difficult to send on the old Nokia type cell phones than on smartphones anyway. So that's definitely been a challenge, and we don't always overcome that challenge. What we try to do is do some just training on the actual sending of a message beyond just the rights and entitlements and all the information, just like how you use the simple technology. And what we've done in one community is we're fortunate enough to have basically a group of older women that we're training, along with a bunch of much younger teenagers and women in their early 20s. So what we try to do in that community is every time we do a training or as we present the SMS project, pair one of the younger women with one of the elder women so they can work together and make sure that at least one of the two is literate in the technology.
Great, thanks. During the day when the panel is not going on, there's actually a projection of the Interstate Migration Alliance that Husnoda and MRC coordinators here who are present are building, which is an alliance of organizations in the source and destination states for advocacy purposes. We won't get into it right now, but moving to Oshim, So, as a trade unionist, what do you think of partnering with this kind of thing? I mean, does it, how would your members benefit? And I know that you are also organizing in parts of Gujarat where you see a lot of migrant workers from Eastern India, like we have in NCR. So, what are some of the potentials you see here?
So let me just first put the first problem is that surely the information and technology can be useful for projecting, for awareness. All that is I think is a fairly well that is a well-known understanding. So I think what is more complex and more difficult is that, and that's where I think we get caught in not being able to totally understand the technology. Is that how do you translate that into a strategy? Let me give an example. Which where not we haven't come to that, but even in our own experience, just giving our field organizers a laptop has changed the nature of our complaint mechanism. And I'm going to come to that. One of the problem in India, and if you take the informality, the migrant, what is really the problem? There's no rule of law. Let's pose the problem very concretely. Rule of law doesn't exist. Now, how do you really bring the rule of law? Is by overwhelming the evidence and overwhelming the complaint mechanism. This has to be a strategy. Now, that is where I think the tools and this can be very useful. Like, I have an example. I mean, if I were to take organize, let's say, a factory, and if they're not paying wages, what I would originally do as an old trade unionist, write a letter, a lot of verbosity, a lot of ideological claims, and say, capitalists are bastards, and what all thing, and you all are bad. But it doesn't really help in the building up of rule of law. Now, because we have a fairly well standard, we have worked out that we can actually see that formal complaints and actually claims of, let's say, 200 workers are actually, the moment it comes to us, we can translate that into a complaint, make a claim, and put it all together. But not only we do that individually, but we can also summarize it and make a larger assertion about it. So it helps us in making a far more stronger case than we used to do earlier. And I think this is like one potential where you bring over the evidence in a certain sense to a legal mechanism. And that is possible because you have the technology to do it. We have automated the first complaint mechanism. What is there to write a complaint? One of the earlier problems is that you need an intellectual, you need an illiterate person to write a complaint. Now, if you want to write 1,000 complaints, all you need is to have just 5 data, and you can generate 1,000 letters in the same way. So the technology is a multiplier. I think it can be multiplied, but the strategy has to be there to be able to address that. So I think in a migration setup, we'll have to figure out what is the strategy in which you use this as a multiplier to be able to pinpoint the direction in which it should go. That to me is still a challenge, and I think having got the tools, we need to still build a strategy to take it to that long.
Thanks a lot. Well, I think that I would like to now turn to the audience because I think many of you have a lot of experiences in the audience, and so I don't know how many of you got a chance to really look around, come back tomorrow. But even from hearing the panelists, let's open it up. Yeah. Can you please introduce yourself if you don't mind? Yeah.
So my name is Moderator and I work with an organization called Startup, and we help seed and scale social entrepreneurs, and currently one of our projects is with the unorganized sector worker. And from my interactions through this project, I gather that a large part of the advocacy focus now is with the, either the employer themselves, and especially in the case of domestic workers, collectivization and working with the employer has been a challenge. So I just wanted to know through these initiatives, through these new age advocacy initiatives, do you have a plan for working with the employers themselves, and does it help collectivize domestic workers, which I believe is one of the successes for, say, the construction workers space? So if it wasn't already.
Okay. Maybe we can take a couple more questions. Does anyone else have questions? Okay, well, oh yeah. Shruti?
Yes. My name is Shruti. I'm a lawyer by training, and I currently work with the Ford Foundation on its urbanization program, equitable urbanization program. My question is about how how, so it's to understand if there is a different approach that is needed to differentiate the trafficked migrants, meaning people who don't voluntarily migrate but are lured into through in the grey space of trafficking. Is there a different technology that is required to be able to reach them because they are in a grey zone?
Yeah.
My name is Rahul. I know my question may be a little outside of the purview of this panel, but I just was curious. So a lot of my friends have been, to the brothels in New Delhi, and their experience has been there are a lot of prostitutes there. They have also been, they are also like trafficked or they have migrated. They migrated, because of like, the typical story. They were lured because, let's say, a singing gig or something like that, and then it obviously went, they went into a brothel. So do you think like this technology can also be channeled towards that?
Okay. Yeah, so let's start answering just to answer Malvika, I think. Yeah. I think I'll just take up the domestic workers organizing because that's an organizing question, and I'm with Gharilu Kamgar Sangathan, which is in Gurgaon, where we organize domestic workers. Our targets are not just employers but also the government. And actually the tablets, we have used tablets to train workers on Sexual Harassment Act, and also we want to use tablets to collect abuse complaints from women. And so as panelists have said, we use the technology as a supplement to collectivization. The technology doesn't help us organize, but it is a very important tool for organizing. So, and it's also leadership building because when women we do training of trainers. So women workers get trained on Sexual Harassment Act, then they can train other workers. So it's a portable tablet that they can take with them. So, yeah. So I think that both the questions are actually very similar with regard to trafficked survivors. And so would that require a different technology? And I think I'm going to ask Igor to answer this one because you're this expert on, well, you have been trying to bridge this trafficking and labor world. So go for it.
Okay, I think it's very important to sort of understand what you mean by trafficking because the most important grievances are usually around, failure to get the minimum wage or some sort of harassment at the workplace or forced overtime, and these are issues which are pretty much related to labor. The actual landing into the situation, the recruitment process, is something which in garment work would be more related to like contractors and it's not too difficult to understand this, and it's not like, yes, there are some patterns of deception, but it's also quite structural so that there's many intermediaries involved so that you may not be able to pinpoint and say, it's the fault of this person and that person. I think, in the International Labor Organization, we're looking more at the labor dynamic. Of course, the migration part is important, and we're looking at that too. But you have to look at it from that perspective. And for that, I think a lot of these types of ICT tools are actually quite relevant. So that's important. Concerning the second question on the issue of sex work, I mean, sex work, there's patterns of enticement and there's patterns of deception, and of course that is a totally different type of issue. But as similar to whether it's in domestic work, garment work, there are many occupations where the actual working conditions are not going to be optimal, and therefore any type of recruitment process that goes into it's going to be a poor outcome. And so what's important is that the migrant and the worker has as much information as possible. However, it's not because the migrant worker or the worker knows that information that exploitation is not going to happen. Because the symmetry of power of an employer or a contractor who knows so much more and has so many more connections, or an employer of a domestic worker whose word is much more powerful than the word of a worker when it comes to police coming in and trying to find out what's happening. In those sort of situations, it's important to highlight the labor relationships and what's happening in the labor, and that's why I think this is a very good sort of.
So I guess in other words, trafficking and labor are very closely related issues. However, there are matters of recruitment that could potentially be a module for training and awareness raising, perhaps. Yeah. So yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Gyan. I'm a banker, so I might sound out of context here. But just thinking out aloud on the points that I heard here. The few problem points that I identified when Krishna was speaking and through the modules was that the employment is not properly mapped in terms of migrant workers. So it may be that, as Igor said, that the thing is the middlemen are not the bad people always. Similar is the case, neither are the employer always the bad people. So why can't we, through the modules, ICT modules that we are having, why can't we develop an exchange where the migrant workers could register and the employers could raise the number of employees in a particular sector that they want. So with this, once a migrant worker, a worker who is registered with that exchange would have a direct mapping of the employer who is with whom he will be employed. Since he would be through that particular exchange, he will also have a formal contract, which I could see that was a prominent issue for addressing the issues for migrant workers. And this would also ensure that Ashinda said that with collectivization or formation of union, we can use this technology for quick multiplication of such institutions. I have worked with lots of farmer groups. So there's a special constitution of companies, that is farmer producer companies. In this, the ownership is, lots of ownership is with the farmer member itself. With little external intervention, they are able to function the entire company and complete complete entity runs. So a similar thing can be run out, and with Malvika saying that they fund such startup, there are cases of similar startups working well in for drivers in logistics industry. So I hope if you can take this ahead, it would be a good idea.
That's a very interesting suggestion. Okay. It's not really a question, it's an idea.
It's an idea.
It's free for all. Go for it, whoever wants to do this startup, including yourself. Yeah?
So my name is Manch, and I'm a scholar in GAWU. So I have two questions basically. So my work is related to migration. I'm not going to read yet, but read a lot of papers on that. One thing I want to ask about is the case of child labor. So in the garment industry, or in case of domestic workers, or under the kind of countries, large section is also child labor, which is actually invisible. So in those cases, when the parents or their guardians, or with whom they have migrated, they might not want these cases to be reported also, because they might lose their jobs, and in case of other migrants also, because reporting means also firing them from the job also. So how to tackle this section of vulnerable migrants? And my second question is regarding the seasonal or food migrants. So it seems like this technology is more useful in some locations, like you target some locations, train them, and those locations are covered. But for about those women or migrants who are every 2-3 months they are migrating, does this awareness which this technology is creating helping them in wherever they go, they can organize that or they keep contact with such organizations, how it helps them? These are the questions.
Any other questions? Okay.
सेकंड आपका क्वेश्चन एक्चुअली हम लोग सिर्फ वर्कर्स जो माइग्रेट कर रहे हैं सिर्फ उनके साथ हम लोग इन्वॉल्व नहीं हैं, उनकी जो फैमिली है जो रह गई सोर्स पे उनके साथ भी हम कोशिश करते हैं कि हम उनके साथ भी जुड़े इन टर्म्स ऑफ कि अगर सेफ माइग्रेशन करना है तो व्हाट आर द थिंग्स जिनको उनको ध्यान में रखना पड़ेगा, लाइक उनके पास आधार होना चाहिए, बैंक अकाउंट अगर वो खुलवा लें, ये बेसिक जो एंटाइटलमेंट से रिलेटेड है, टीडीएस का है, तो वो हम कोशिश करते हैं कि उनकी जो फैमिली है उनके साथ भी हम शेयर करें ताकि अगर माइग्रेशन शॉर्ट टर्म हो या लॉन्ग टर्म हो, अगर शॉर्ट टर्म है तो अगर वो वर्कर वापस आ रहा है तो उसकी फैमिली एटलीस्ट उसको वो मैसेज दे पाए। तो ये एक चीज़ हम लोग कर रहे हैं। सेकेंड थिंग है कि हम लोगों का जो इंटरवेंशन है वो सोर्स पे भी है और डेस्टिनेशन पे भी है, तो वी ट्राई टू लिंक सोर्स विद द डेस्टिनेशन। तो हम लोग ये कोशिश करते हैं कि डेस्टिनेशन पे मतलब अगर आप ट्रांजिट कर रहे हो, एक मजदूर जो है वो माइग्रेट कर रहा है, तो माइग्रेट करने के बाद जो उसको दिक्कतें हो रही है वो तो हम एड्रेस कर रहे हैं, बट ड्यूरिंग द ट्रांजिशन और बिफोर माइग्रेशन भी क्या चैलेंजेस है उनको भी हम सोर्स पे इंटरवेन मीन्स कर रहे हैं और उनको हम कनेक्ट करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं। मतलब हम ये चाह रहे हैं कि एक जो लिंक है, जो अलग अलग डॉट्स हर एरियाज में बिखरे हुए हैं, उनको हम कैसे जोड़ पाए और जोड़ करके एक मजदूर किस तरीके से अपनी वॉइस को रेज करे, जानकारी उसके पास हो और वो अपने लाइफ पे कोई चेंज ना। तो बेसिकली
Any other inputs?
Can I just respond?
Yeah.
See, I want to just take there have been such experiments, it's not that. There has been an experiment of what is called an exchange in the construction industry where actually people have creators and software and digital exchange and people have. I myself have cooperatives which has actually takes up such a thing. But the problem is that the assumption there is that there is first a contract. You can actually, this will happen, the tool and this process can be useful within the first instance between the person who's going to take this job and the person who wants that. There is a kind of relationship that builds up. So it can only be brought out if already there's a broader understanding of the collective bargaining and a contract has already come to existence. The presumption here is that there's a possibility of a contract. If the point is that the market does not deal with that contract phenomena, then this tool doesn't work out. So that is a really fundamental, more political question than the thing. But if it exists, then it can be a fantastic way of doing it. So that's one really very important way of looking at it. But it is possible. There are lots of experimentation being done. And I think the experience has been that if there is a relationship, if there's an industry and a set of unions come to an agreement that we want to eliminate this process, that's the first part. The second part is you will have to understand that whenever you have this kinds of migration, it always has multiple layers of contractual agreement. It's not that there's a one worker coming up with straight away to some person. Now, until there's multiple layers of contractual relationships or contractors have to be eliminated, then there has to be a decision by someone who's in the top of the supply chain. If they decide that we want to really help, let's say, a worker come in, let's say, I know an example of L&T which says we will recruit only if the workers come directly to us, then it is possible to build up such an agreement. But if the L&T decides that I will only have 20 contractors and they will have subcontractors, then this model will not work. So one has to understand the limitations of this kind of modeling of when you're doing in relation to exactly the strategy. So the first, I do want to respond to the question. We have a union of sex workers. So there's a lot of misconception about it. It is true that most of them are distress migration, and there is a distress migration. There is always an element of, let's say, trafficking. But I think trafficking does not constitute the whole of the sex workers industry. So this assumption is actually wrong. And it's an emotive question, but it is not really true that everyone who comes into the sex industry comes by way of a trafficking. Surely 10 to 15% do come into trafficking, but most of them come because of distress migration, right? And once they come into the sex work industry, then the problem is not about anything about trafficking or anyone really. The question is that they are, and this is a well-known thing, whether they can bargain in their relationship, whether someone can respect them, that they are having, as a sex worker also they have a right. And this is a big debate. One need not go into this at this point, but there is a distinction between a sex worker's labor rights and whether the sex worker is good or bad. But if you are going to assume the sex worker is a worker, then you have to also accept that she or he has certain labor rights which has to be respected. In India, most of the time the sex worker is criminalized. So the problem is you can't even assert. The assertion itself becomes a problem. So somewhere the tools of this kind could be useful. Like to be given an example, it could be very useful to know what is in a particular area, how many sex workers are there to bargain with the, let's say, you have to understand the structure of the industry. The structure of the industry is decided by what is called where the sex work takes place, right? And that is actually what is called the big building. The whole lobby is all about where the sex work takes place. It's not about the client or the sex worker. Actually, the biggest amount of the profit is taken away by actually the police and the building, the hotels, the motels where actually the sex work takes place. That is a really complex, and no one has a right to negotiate about it. So if you build up that kind of framework, then it helps in negotiating that kind of question.
Actually, I would like to. So I also want to give HELM Studio Rajan. Where is Rajan? Is he in the room? No, it's all right. Rajan and Mridul, these are very close people to SLD who have really built this technology for us. And it's a very special relationship because it's not like doing a layout of a report, which you can give to one organization one day, give it to another organization another day. I think HELM and SLD has built, some kind of close partnership. So I would like Mridul to give you a chance to talk about what was the experience like in developing this in a way that satisfied demanding people who wanted it to be proper for the constituency.
Well, it was a very intense experience. And right now the version of the application that we see is actually a third version. From our perspective is 1.0.3. We went through so many iterations because at every step, understanding who our target audience is, and actually our target audience is primarily illiterate and we is using technology to train them. They have never even seen, some of them have never even used a mobile phone and we are asking them to use tablets. So the challenges were immense, and at every step we had to, so the whole design process was very iterative. We did one version, we went out, tested it on people, understood alright, these words they don't understand. They cannot understand what a play button is, so how do you tackle these situations? And plus we had limited time to do that. So I would say everybody pointed out, this is just a beginning, this is not the ultimate. And it will never be like that because technology will keep evolving and problems will keep evolving and we'll have to constantly keep building and keep innovating. So it's an iterative process. We've done a decent version right now, but there are already a lot of great ideas. After we went out in the field, sat with people, showed it to them, understood each and every minute detail, how we tested it with the actual user, how they use it, what they understand, what they don't understand. Language was a very big problem because we're dealing in 3 states where dialects are different. Some words work, some words do not work. Simple thing like Kanun, Act, what is an act? Adhiniyam, right? We did an entire script where we were constantly using Adhiniyam, but nobody understands Adhiniyam. So we then said, alright, let it be, let's use Kanun as a word. So there were a lot of these small little details that we had to look at and eventually tone down the language because when we started trying to take these laws and convert these laws into understandable scripts for people, it was a very big challenge. half of the things I don't understand. And how do I design something which people who are absolutely literate can understand? So it's just the first version. There's a long way.
So I want to really congratulate Rajan and Ritul because these are people who have basically extremely creative people who could make tons of money in the corporate world. And they have decided to instead use their creativity for social justice. So, yay for them, and lucky for SLD that the partnership can happen. I know it's getting late, so unless people have more any questions or comments out there, please come back to see the exhibition and see the tools for yourself tomorrow. Thank you so much for coming. You've been a great audience and a great panel. And I just want to give a round of applause to everyone.